Lost on Everest, the heartbreaking fate of an American heroine uncovered after 9 years. She was a trailblazer. The first American woman to conquer Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, but mere hours after her historic triumph, she vanished. In the treacherous death zone, for 9 years, her story remained frozen in time until one British climber returned and did something no one else had dared. What he discovered and what he did next would rewrite her legacy forever. Francys Arsentiev had everything to live for. At 40, she was a seasoned mountaineer with an infectious smile and boundless ambition. Her son, Paul, was the heart of her world, and her husband, Sergey, a legendary Russian climber nicknamed the Snow Leopard, shared her passion for tackling the planet's most perilous peaks. But Francys had one dream that consumed her: to become the first American woman to summit Mount Everest without bottled oxygen. It was a goal that had claimed the lives of even the most experienced climbers, a challenge that pushed the human body beyond its breaking point. As she packed her gear that spring, Francys penned a simple note to Paul, enclosing a map of her journey to the Himalayas. "Hi Paul, we're at base camp. Miss you and love you, Mum." She could never have imagined that 9 years later, a British climber's decision would change everything about her story. On May 17, 1998, Mount Everest's base camp hummed with the usual pre-summit energy, but Francys and Sergey Arsentiev stood apart from the other climbing teams. Unlike the heavily supported expeditions with their Sherpas, supplemental oxygen, and radio communications, the couple climbed alone. This wasn't recklessness, was a calculated risk by two of the world's most experienced high-altitude climbers. Sergey had earned his Snow Leopard nickname by conquering the 5 highest peaks in the former Soviet Union and had summited all 3 peaks of Kangxi in a single traverse, an achievement most elite climbers wouldn't even dream of attempting. But even legends can underestimate Everest. Their first attempt on May 20th failed when their headlamps died at the first step. Their second attempt on May 21st was abandoned after climbing just 50 meters before turning back. Each failed attempt meant another night spent above 8,000 meters in the death zone, where the human body begins to deteriorate with every passing moment. By May 22nd, they had already endured 3 nights at deadly altitude. Their bodies were breaking down, their strength ebbing away with every hour. Any rational climber would have descended, accepting defeat. But Francys wasn't rational about this. Golshi was obsessed. At 1 a.m. on May 22nd, in temperatures cold enough to freeze flesh in minutes, they began their final summit attempt. Moving slower than ever without supplemental oxygen, they climbed through the darkness toward their destiny. What they couldn't know was that this decision would separate them forever. One would achieve immortal fame, the other would vanish without a trace, and both would become part of Everest's most haunting mystery. Hours passed. The sun rose over the Himalayas, revealing 2 tiny figures still climbing when they should have been descending. They were making a fatal mistake that would forge a legend and a tragedy, one that would take 9 years to resolve. Late in the afternoon of May 22nd, 1998, Francys Arsentiev stood on the summit of Mount Everest. She had done it, the first American woman to reach the world's highest point without supplemental oxygen. But instead of triumph, she felt only exhaustion. Her body was shutting down, her movements slow, deliberate, mechanical. Beside her, Sergey was equally spent. They had summited dangerously late in the day, a mistake that kills more climbers than any other on Everest. The golden rule of Everest is simple: the summit is only halfway. Getting down alive is what separates success from tragedy. As they began their descent in the fading light, neither could have imagined they were starting the most heart-wrenching separation in mountaineering history. Somewhere in the darkness, amid exhaustion and oxygen deprivation, they lost each other. By morning, Sergey had made it to camp, but Francys was nowhere to be found. The realization hit him like an avalanche. His wife, the woman he'd climbed the world's highest peaks with, the mother of young Paul waiting at home, was somewhere above him on the mountain, alone and in trouble. Without hesitation, Sergey grabbed an oxygen tank and medicine and headed back up into the death zone. He was going to save her or die trying. No one who knew Sergey was surprised by this decision. It was exactly what the snow leopard would do. But as he climbed higher, searching desperately for any sign of Francys, he had no way of knowing that other climbers had already found her, and what they discovered would haunt them for the rest of their lives. A Uzbek climbing team, making their own summit attempt, had encountered Francys near the summit. She was barely conscious, suffering from severe oxygen deprivation and frostbite. Her condition was critical, but she was alive. The Uzbek climbers did everything they could. They gave her oxygen, tried to help her move, but they were climbing without Sherpa support and had limited supplies. Eventually, exhausted and depleted of their own oxygen, they were forced to leave her with an empty oxygen bottle and descend to save themselves. But they made one crucial decision that would save lives. They clipped her harness to a fixed rope to prevent her from sliding down the mountain face. That evening, as the Uzbek team descended, they encountered Sergey climbing up through the darkness, still searching for his wife. They told him where to find her. It was the last time anyone would see the snow leopard alive. What happened next would remain a mystery for an entire year, but the discovery, when it finally came, would reveal the true depth of love and sacrifice in one of climbing's greatest tragedies. On May 24, 1998, British climber Ian Woodall and South African climber Cathy O'Dowd were within 300 meters of the Everest summit when O'Dowd spotted something that would change both their lives forever. A flash of purple fabric, a spasmodic movement in the shadows of the first step. "That body's alive," O'Dowd told her partner. "I'm going to have a look." What she found would haunt her dreams for years to come. Lying in a grotesque, inverted V, clipped to a fixed rope, was a woman with skin as white and smooth as porcelain, sign of severe frostbite that made her look like a sleeping doll. Her long dark hair framed a face that was beautiful despite the ravages of the mountain. Then the woman opened her eyes. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her pupils huge dark voids in the thin air. "Don't leave me here to die." O'Dowd felt sick. The woman looked like her, similar age, similar features. For a terrifying moment, she felt like she was staring at her own possible future. "I am an American," the woman said suddenly. "I am an American." That's when they realized who she was. Francys Arsentiev, the vibrant woman who had sat in their base camp tent just days earlier, talking about her son Paul back home, sharing tea and stories of family. Ian Woodall arrived with their Sherpa team. They found Sergey's ice axe and rope lying nearby, but no sign of the Russian climber. The empty oxygen bottle the Uzbek team had left was beside Francys, and her down gloves were scattered nearby, signs of hypothermia that had made her feel dangerously warm, causing her to remove protective clothing. For over an hour, they tried everything. They attempted to pull her into a sitting position, but she was completely limp, unable to support her own weight. They tried to get her arms into her jacket sleeves, but she had no motor control. When they tried to make her stand, her legs crumpled like spaghetti. "If you can help us, "We can try and move you down the mountain," Woodall told her, staring directly into her face, searching for any sign of coherent response. "If you don't, you're going to die." There was nothing. She was conscious, but not mentally present. The mountain had taken her mind even before it took her life. The temperature was -30°C, standing still for over an hour. The rescue team was beginning to suffer their own frostbite. They faced an impossible choice: attempt a rescue that would likely kill them all, or abandon a conscious woman to die alone on the mountain. "Why are you doing this to me?" Francys asked, her voice barely audible. Those words cut deeper than any wind. She didn't understand that they were trying to help. In her oxygen-starved confusion, she thought they were tormenting her. The decision came without discussion. Even the Uzbek climbers who had tried to help her the day before had reached the same conclusion. She was too far gone to save Dot. As they prepared to leave, Francys had stopped talking and seemed to sink into unconsciousness. O'Dowd lost all desire to reach the summit. "I climb because I enjoy it," she would later say. "After finding Fran, there was no way reaching the top could have given me pleasure." They left her there, still clipped to the guide rope, still breathing. It was the last time she would be seen alive. But the mystery of what happened to Sergey was just beginning, and the story of Francys herself was far from over. Francys Arsentiev died alone on May 24, 1998, still clipped to that guide rope high on Mount Everest. The woman who had achieved her ultimate dream, becoming the first American woman to summit Everest without oxygen, had paid the ultimate price. But what happened to Sergey remained a haunting mystery. The last confirmed sighting was when the Uzbek climbers encountered him, climbing up through the darkness on May 23rd, carrying oxygen and medicine to save his wife. After that, the snow leopard simply vanished into the thin air of the death zone. Had he reached Francys? His ice axe and rope found beside her suggested he had. But where was his body? How had he died? The questions tormented everyone who knew their story. Back home in Colorado, 10-year-old Paul DiStefano waited for news that would never come. His mother's last letter, with its cheerful message and hand-drawn map, became a heartbreaking reminder of dreams that turned to nightmares. But on Everest, Francys's story was just beginning its most disturbing chapter. Her body lay in full view of the main climbing route on the north side of the mountain. Every climber attempting to summit from that direction would have to pass. Her in her purple jacket, with her peaceful expression and dark hair spread around her like a sleeping beauty from a fairy tale. She became a macabre landmark. Climbers began calling her Sleeping Beauty. Season after season, expedition after expedition, hundreds of climbers passed her body. Some stopped to pay respects, others hurried by, disturbed by the sight. A few took photographs that would circulate on the internet, turning her death into a ghoulish tourist attraction. "Turn right at the guy with the green boots," climbers would say, referring to another body that served as a navigation point. "Turn left at the woman in the purple jacket." There was no dignity in it. The cost of recovering a body from that altitude was estimated between $40,000 and $100,000. The technical challenges were enormous, the ethical questions even more complex. Who had the responsibility? Who had the right? For 9 years, Arsentiev remained where she died, a frozen monument to both human ambition and human tragedy. Thousands of people saw her. Hundreds passed within feet of her body, but no one did anything about it until 2007, when one man decided enough was enough. The same British climber who had abandoned his own. Summit attempt to stay with her in her final hours couldn't forget those desperate words. "Don't leave me here to die." He had left her to die because he had no choice. But now, 9 years later, Ian Woodall was coming back to keep a promise he'd carried in his heart for nearly a decade. What he was planning would be unprecedented, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. The expedition Woodall organized was called the Tao of Everest, and its mission was unlike any other in mountaineering history. Woodall planned to return to that spot at 8,500 meters higher than any mountain outside the Himalayas to give Francys Arsentiev the burial she deserved. The logistics were staggering, the risks enormous. Moving a frozen body at that altitude would require extraordinary strength, perfect weather conditions, and tremendous courage. One mistake could create more casualties. But Woodall had another reason for this mission. In 1999, a member of the Mallory and Irvine expedition had finally solved the mystery of what happened to Sergey Arsentiev. Jake Norton discovered the Russian climber's body lower on the mountain. Face apparently killed in a fall while attempting to rescue his wife. The evidence suggested that Sergey had indeed reached Francys after the Uzbek team left her. He had tried to save her, leaving his ice axe and rope beside her before attempting to carry or drag her to safety. But the effort had cost him his life, and Francys, too weak to move on her own, had remained where he left her. It was a love story that ended in double tragedy, a husband's ultimate sacrifice that went unwitnessed and unrecorded. The snow leopard had died as he lived, attempting the impossible to save someone he loved. Now Woodall wanted to honor both their memories. As his team established base camp in 2007, Woodall explained his motivation. "At the back of my mind, I hoped someone would eventually do something for her. But the only reason anyone would be up that high is if they're on their way to the summit or on the way down. In either case, you can't really devote the hours required to bury a corpse." It needed a dedicated mission. This was that mission. The climb to her location would take days. The work of moving her body would be exhausting at an altitude where every breath is a struggle, and the weather window for such an operation was narrow. One storm could trap the team in the death zone with no hope of rescue. But Woodall had made a promise 9 years earlier, as he'd walked away from Francys Arsentiev, leaving her to die alone on the mountain. He'd vowed that someday, somehow, he would return to give her dignity in death. That day had finally come. On May 23, 2007, exactly 9 years after Francys Arsentiev spoke her last words to another human being, Ian Woodall stood beside her body once again. She looked exactly as she had in 1998. The extreme cold and thin air had preserved her perfectly, like a time capsule of that terrible day. Her purple jacket was still bright against the grey rock. Her dark hair still framed her face. She still looked like she was sleeping. But now, finally, someone had come to wake her from her long slumber. Woodall and his team had carried an American flag up the mountain. In a brief but moving ceremony at 8,500 meters above sea level, they draped it over Francys's body and said a prayer. For the first time in 9 years, she was treated not as a landmark or a cautionary tale, but as a human being who deserved respect. Then came the difficult work. Moving a frozen body at that altitude pushed the limits of human endurance. Every action required enormous effort in the thin air. The team worked methodically, carefully, reverently. They weren't just moving a corpse, they were fulfilling a sacred obligation. Slowly, respectfully, they moved Francys to a lower location on the mountain face, placing her where she would no longer be visible to passing climbers. They built a simple cairn of roxa, only burial possible at that altitude. For the first time since 1998, climbers attempting Everest's north route would not have to pass the Sleeping Beauty. She had finally been laid to rest with dignity. Later reflected on the mission, "This will be my last expedition, so I thought it would be fitting to give something back." But the expedition accomplished more than just moving a body. It honored the memory of both Francys and Sergey Arsentiev, a couple whose love story had become one of mountaineering's greatest tragedies and greatest examples of sacrifice. The woman who dreamed of being the first American to summit Everest without oxygen had achieved her goal, even if it cost her everything. The husband who could have saved himself had chosen to die trying to rescue the woman he loved. And a British climber who had carried guilt and sadness for 9 years had finally found a way to transform tragedy into something meaningful. Today, Paul DiStefano, the 10-year-old boy who said goodbye to his mother in 1998, is a grown man. He carries with him not just the memory of her last letter, but the knowledge that strangers cared enough about his mother to risk their lives ensuring she was treated with dignity. Francys Arsentiev's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories come at the highest cost, that love can drive people to attempt the impossible, and that even in death, even on the world's most unforgiving mountain, human compassion can triumph over indifference. She vanished from Mount Everest in 1998, 9 years later. A British climber did something that proved the best of humanity endures, even in the worst of circumstances. He kept a promise that honor demanded but few would have fulfilled. In doing so, he gave the Sleeping Beauty something more precious than any summit. He gave her peace. Thanks for staying until the end. If this story gripped you, like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that refuse to stay buried.